Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. On behalf of American Petroleum Professionals of Iranian Heritage, APPIH, we have an honor that from the last year, we started a series of talks that overview careers of the seniors in oil and gas and their perspective and advice for next generations. Today, we have a great honor to host Dr. Honarpour to overview his career and listen to his advice. Dr. Honarpour is a president of Honarpour Technology Company, LLC. He has contributed to rock fluid properties and their integration in reservoir engineering of conventional sandstone, carbonate, and unconventional reservoir. He is specialized in special core analysis, rock mechanical properties, and EOR process such as chemical, thermal, immiscible, and miscible gas injection and carbon storage projects. Dr. Honarpour was principal reservoir engineer at BHP for 7 years, global reservoir engineering advisor at Hess Corporation for 6 years. Before that, he was with Exxon E&P Technical Center and ExxonMobil Upstream Research Center, URC, as a senior engineer advisor for 18 years. He was reservoir characterization and rock fluid integration manager at IITRI and IPR earlier, and professor of the petroleum engineering at Montana Tech. Before that, he was reservoir engineer at Oil Service Company, OSCO, conducting reservoir engineering of some of the giant fractured carbonate reservoir in the Middle East. Dr. Honarpour received SP International Formation Evaluation Award in 2011, SP Distinguished Member Award, and SP Outstanding Technical Editor Award in 2013. He was active in coordinating several SP events. Moreover, Dr. Honarpour was the president of Society of Core Analysts, SCA, and was awarded SCA Lifetime Achievement Award in 2000. Dr. Honarpour earned his BS Master and PhD degree from the University of Missouri. He has authored and co-authored over 100 technical articles and 3 books in the reservoir characterization, reservoir engineering, and relative permeability of petroleum reservoirs. He holds several patents and he is registered as a professional engineer in Texas. I would love to thank Dr. Honarpour for accepting our invitation, and without further delay, I'm transferring the microphone to him for starting his presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Honarpour.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Dr. Samoui. I often have presented, as you said, 100 papers, and I never had an opportunity to introduce myself. So this is a different perspective, and I hope you stop me if I go too much into the detail of my personal career rather than things that helps participants. So it's a small group, so we're going to have a good time, share information that I have gone through over the past 50 years. In 1965, I decided to come to the United States. At that time, 1965, not too many people came to the States. There were about 20 of us at the University of Missouri, Rolla. And I came to this country with my own initiative, without having any resources and very few people that I knew. So have to depend on myself. And from the time that I landed in JFK, I was saying, okay, where can I find a job? And of course, it was illegal to work because we had a student visa. And then you had to be registered in school. So I registered in a language institute. And then at the same time, 10 hours working in order to pay for it. And so it was very challenging. And then I had acceptance from some of the universities in California and decided to go to Missouri because it was too expensive and I didn't have enough money. So Midwest was a good place to go get engineering education. And I chose petroleum engineering because it was viable. I still was planning to go to Iran, back to Iran, and petroleum engineering was highly desirable. And one of the first person that I met at Missouri was Mr. Charlie, they called him Mohsen Hekmat, who became a owner of a drilling company, international drilling company. And then he later on sold it, and then he became a giant professionals that he was an example for me as far as a role model. So if you go to the next one, while I was a student, I finished my BS and MS and degrees, and then I had interview. And to tell you the truth, I didn't have money to attend and get a flight to come to Houston to attend my interview. So I asked the company who was interviewing me, Shell Oil Company. It was Shell Asiatic, and they were hiring for Iranian operation through OSCO, Oil Service Company. So I started going back to Iran, and then I started working in the MIS. And something that surprised me was some of these big statues of lions on the cemetery, in a cemetery in Masjid Suleiman. And I said, what are these? I thought, it may be something has to do with the, UFO or something. But many of them, and I said, finally explained to me, the local people, that these are statue of lions that they put it on a graveyard or grave of some of the distinguished people. So I said, I like this, but I am not ready to die yet. But this was very interesting because Masjid Suleiman was the earliest civilization that existed in southern part of Iran. And if you haven't visited MIS, it's a really beautiful place in the spring area. So this was I was about 4.5 years working in MIS. And I think if you go to the next slide, and this is the well number 1 in Masjid Suleiman, that it was the first commercial well in the Middle East. And these wells were producing at several thousand barrels a day. In the case of one example in Gachsaran, was producing 10,000 barrels a day for a long time without significant delta P, because these were fractured reservoirs and easy to produce. They have, I don't know whether you call them fracture, but they were an inch thickness and a long fractures that cause that type of production. Many of the wells in Masjid Suleiman, still some of them are recompleted because with the initiation of Des dam, the water pressure in the area, 50 miles away, start raising. And as a result, these reservoirs were gas cap process, and then water flood or bottom water drive, and then solution gas. So all three drive mechanisms were apparent. So when the water pressure went up, these old wells, 30, 40 years old well, start displacing the oil again and start producing. So that was amazing because the wells were corroded. It was very dangerous to operate it, but I think they recompleted them. And some of these wells may be still producing. So anyway, I wasn't working on this, but I thought, historically you need to know about these. Next slide, please. All right, my first project was, as you know, there's 1,000 miles of pipelines in southern part of Iran connecting all the producing fields to export lines going to Kharg Island. And you could see in here, these are 42-inch pipeline. And many of them, it's a 42-inch that, probably a Volkswagen can drive through them. And my job was optimization of these grid pipeline with all the pumping station. And of course, I was saying that I'm a reservoir engineer. Why are you putting me on production engineer? Well, as a graduate, you got to get used to it. You have to be flexible. Every opportunities you can learn from. So this was very important for flow-through pipe in various terrain, because some of the terrain were highly sloped, 20 degrees, 30 degrees, and it was very difficult to pump through these lines. The wax and asphalting was needed, that sometimes they have to do the pigging, leaks and others, because there were some CO2, the H2S leak that caused a lot of damage and loss of life. So, because part of it was a sour crude oil, and this sour crude oil through pipeline was going to the Karanj River. And then through the winter, the capacity of this line was going really low. My job was, how can we add a few loops to this massive network of pipeline in order to increase the capacity of the export without putting a new pipeline system. Anyway, after a few months in there, I was transferred to Gatsaran Field Reservoir Engineering and cap management. And so those are the fractured reservoirs that Gatsaran, very challenging, but it was very unique, because carbonate reservoirs with the fractures like that, they were fantastic producers, but water aquifer that is connected to all of these reservoirs could break through. And once you broke through, it's going to be very challenging to produce oil. Water overwhelm everything. So recently, I think because of the restriction, Iranian government has put a dry gas from North Field or South Pars and re-inject into these reservoirs. And so they energizing these reservoirs and pushing the water down. So it's a new life in these. But I think these are the learning that you have to be flexible to accept and challenge, and the university doesn't prepare you for this type of project, but it gives you very, very basics of physics and chemistry and engineering that you can apply and solve problems. And that's what I was facing for the 5 years that I was in Iran. Then the situation became a little bit difficult in 1975, and I had a little boy, and my wife wanted to go to school. We decided to come back to the U.S. and pursue my PhD. But that 4 years of experience in Iran put me in a very good position to appreciate and understand the process of producing oils and how to maximize it. So having some field experience while you're going to school, it's utmost valuable. Unfortunately, at that time with the F1 visa, they did not allow me to learn in the United States. So that was the problem. But as soon as I came back to do my PhD, it was very difficult, again, because of the Iranian Revolution and the perception that people had about hostages and all that. It made it very difficult to land some jobs and summer jobs and all that. So this is the same situation that the students are going through, but you have to find solution, find somewhere that you work. So after I got my PhD, a few places I interviewed, they accepted me, but they withdrew after the situation of Iran, they withdrew the offer. So that was an additional, a kick in the stomach that, it says, we have come here and work hard, but why are not given the same right to learn? So these are the challenges that you could see exist today. Price of oil and all of that going up and down. It is a very challenging environment, but also prepare very tough engineers for operating in this condition. All right, could we go to the next slide?
Before going to next slide, we have two questions from the Dr. Mehrabian. He asked, which year was this pipeline, and do we have still those pipeline operational or not?
Well, these pipelines were at that time was carrying about 3 million barrels of oil for export every day. And then I was part of the team that they were working how to increase production from Iran to 10 million barrels a day. And that required a lot of new pipelines. And at that time, Saudi was supposed to produce 20 million barrels a day. So they were projecting a 5-year plan to make the concession areas to be able to meet the demand of the world. Of course, Iranian Revolution took place and a lot of changes. Production from Iranian field never exceeded 5-6 million barrels per day. But the perspective of the operating companies, international energy companies, was to have Iran to produce 10 million barrels a day. And that's why the pipelines were supposed to optimize and then see how can we put some of these new pipelines.
In what year did you work here?
I worked in 1971 to 1975.
Okay, great. This is the question. Thank you.
And I just tell you how old I am. But I love this. I love this industry that I never feel that I'm old enough to retire. So that's why you see my career is going from one company to another. Every one of them was a learning experience for me.
Good afternoon, everybody. May I inject a comment in there?
Please.
Love, Reza. Good to see you.
Same here. And Jim said he might join us later, and he congratulated you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Okay. The pipeline that you're talking about, the 42-inch pipeline, actually went max during 1973, went to 7.9 to 8 million barrels a day.
It did go to 8 million?
It was fluctuating between 7.9 to 8.
Excellent. Excellent.
I was a young staff at IIT, and I was in training in a control room with all the production from all the production units towards Harg Island. And it was, anyhow, it would touch and go the 8 million barrels a day. And that was 1972.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. My boss at that time was Dick Goodnight. And then there was another Dutch, engineer took over. And then we were working with some of the people that were in production. And we, in a reservoir, we were identifying wells, location of the wells, to be able to produce enough to meet the production quotas. So it was an experience. Dick Goodnight, and then there was a Dutch guy, and then Angelo Chattis was the other one that came from Mobil. So they were group of, to tell you the truth, I think you could agree with me that it was very efficient company that was working there. And even though they were a combination of expats and Iranian, just like Abu Dhabi that is doing it today. So it was, of course, nationalism, we all like to see Iranian to handle that, but it was a good way of transferring technology and learning some of these things.
In fact, the expats around the world, especially United States, they were competing to just get an assignment in Iran, in the south.
You're exactly right. So one of my recommendations to young generation is get some international experience. This is very important because, there is a lot of competition and there is a lot of technology from various companies come in operation. I mean, the same thing is happening in Tengiz and Kashagan and many of the Abu Dhabi reservoir, Atco and all that, and Upper Zakum, that you maybe have heard of it, Reza. Anyway, that's all I have in that area. We can go to the next slide. Well, my interest was very about rock fluid interaction. So once I got my PhD and went to Iran for 4 years, came back to the US, and while I was accepted a job at Montana Tech as an associate professor and in petroleum engineering department. My interest was recovery processes. And so basically I didn't have the university didn't have much of a new technologies. I became a member of the Rotary Club. Again, this is some of the involvement in various organizations. And I sat one day next to the president of the Jane Phillips Hospital in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. And I said, you know, it would be fantastic if you guys can contribute to our school by supplying it, you know, maybe we could use your CT scanner. So they said, sure, why don't you come after 8 o'clock at 8 p.m. and use the CT scanner for any time of work you want. So this is a learning from this. The sky is the limit. You have to go and solicit for some of these things. So they allow me to use the CT scanner, and I was going after the school, doing some of the work there. And later on, with a good relation, they donated CT scan to the company that I was working for, IIT Research Center. The whole facilities was transferred there, and we started using this for some of the MEOR, some of the CO2 injection, and a lot of opportunity. So, you know, this is, you know, the old-time engineers, they did not feel limited by things that were around us. Otherwise, you can't generate new technologies. There's always limitation. And here I use the dual energy CT, and I patented that. But my main interest was the heterogeneity. How would that affect fluid flow? Everybody was doing work on a clean rock, you know, sandstone, and I was saying that I haven't seen too many reservoirs that they are clean sandstone, but a lot of heterogeneity. So CT scan opened up my eyes and a lot of others. The only company that were ahead of me was Shell. Shell E&P, there's a few people that they were ahead, and Shell did allow them to do the CO2, study the CO2 override and the pressure, optimum pressure to inject. So I was learning from them, and I published a couple of papers that is still people refer to it. So that was the learning from this. If you can go to the next slide. So while I was working at the university, a couple of summers, I got jobs at at a company that I mentioned, IIT Research Institute, which is Illinois Institute of Technology. So they were big in tight gas in Chicago area facilities. And so, and they had programmed to attract professors to work in summer in their various facilities. And so I was given the opportunity to work with some of these tight gas as IIT is MEOR, microbial enhanced oil recovery, and other things like a gas injection in a very laminated system. And here is, we had a group of visitors from Nigeria that I was demonstrating and showing them the CT capability, CT scan capability when I joined Mobil. One of the projects that I worked for Mobil was to measure gas condensate relative permeabilities and reservoir management in the Arun field, which is in Aceh province in Indonesia. And this is a limestone reservoir that was highly vagular. I didn't think it's going to be that challenging to do the recovery process of gas condensate. It was a lean gas condensate, about 42 barrels per million, that basically to see how, when the condensate drops, when the pressure is below dew point, and then what is the recovery, that valuable liquid that drops out. So I was doing that, and then when the Mobil office contacted me, they said, we are very interested in what you're doing, and would you consider to interview with us? So I interviewed them, and they offered me a job. And so I joined Mobile, where we start working on some of the gas field, like a North Field or South Powers. I was the lead engineers and project manager of a lot of the work that we were doing on improved recovery of the North Field, and they were talking to Iran at that time about how to do managing the reservoir. Of course, there was also the political issues, but the learning is you really need to go a step of what is conventional to come up with new ideas and implement these new ideas. And it's always, there are naysayers that they say, oh, you're wasting your time, money. But when it becomes fruitful, then they all want to claim it. So you got to be brave enough to step without making people upset at you, but joining them to a team that you could manage some of these new ideas and projects. So if you go to the next one, next slide. This is, I decided that we really need to build up a system, engineering a system. As you could see, there is a core holder on the bottom right, and there is a series of precision pumps that the company made it in the US that they could inject at a very low rate, so you could simulate fluid movement in the reservoir. And then this is a closed system. So this is X-ray and microwave for in situ saturation measurement. So we had to design a core holder that can hold 5,000 to 6,000 PSI without to be metallic, because if you make it metallic, microwave could not go through it. So using this dual energy system, we could monitor some of the fluid flow system. And if some of you who worked in Iran, you know that some of the South Powers or North Field have a lot of moldic porosity. Moldic porosity is large pores and then connected to each other through very small portholes. I say example of it is a lot of nice, huge houses in Memorial in Houston. And you know what happened to it when there's a flood. The flood do not allow the people to get out of their house because the steel streets and all that is preventing easy flow of people going back and forth. The same situation with moldic limestone. Huge amount of gas and gas condensate can be trapped without being produced. So that was the main thing. There was about 100 TCF of gas was trapped by a natural water drive in Northfield. And then the question was how much of it is going to be produced as the reservoir pressure drops. So you hear people cavalier manner, they mention these. Oh, you know, that trapped gas. And my question was, can we produce it? And how much pressure drop does it take for this gas inside the pore to expand and mobilize? Initially, everybody says, oh, this is, you know, you're pipe dreaming. And then when I showed that this is going to happen, then there is a lot of project was coming from Qatar and a lot of engineers. One of them is Saad Al-Kabi, who's the oil minister of Qatar now. He was one of the trainees that I spent, and he went to Penn State, and then we stayed with us for 2 years at Mobile, and we were training them and helping him to operate some of these systems and learn in the process. So it's established a relation that lasted for a very long time. And Saad Al-Kabi was, you know, anytime we didn't need an appointment to go to see him, while people at Mobil and Exxon, they needed to get appointment 1 month before going to see him. And everybody was surprised, how did this happen? Well, it's part of the jobs that you try to facilitate. You want to talk with them on a win-win situation and be a real partner with them. So Qatar, Nigeria was another project that I worked on it. And it was a giant oil reservoir, light oil reservoir, that I saw commonly people doing some of the work at service companies, and showing very performance that is not what a giant reservoir high permeability should do. So I did some studies in our system and show under gravity drainage, the remaining oil could be very low. And then we went and drilled a well, worked with the drilling people. In fact, an Iranian friend, his name was Motahed. And Motahed was working in Mobile, Canada, and he became manager of the drilling. And he helped to drill a well in the gas cap and measure remaining oil from a gravity drainage. And it showed us one we were predicting about 6% was very valid. And that add millions of barrels to the production and the reserve. That is still, when I was at Exxon, they were very much acknowledging the work that we've done. So you see, you start something based on a reality. How can you add some value? And I think old-timers, they always were worrying about that. How can we do something? We're investing something. This took about 2 years to develop this system, and it cost about $1 million. But the extra upside from the field was about 200,000-300,000 barrels, and in a whole joint venture area became 500,000 barrels because of this addition of recovery mechanism of a gravity drainage that we implemented. All right, go to the next one. Well, this is about earlier, I published a book based on the two-phase flow learning during the university work and other industry. And this is an article that appeared in the Mobile World. I really didn't know about that. It has description of the book that I published and how many languages it has been translated to. And of course, I wasn't sure whether I want to show that my picture from my 30 years old, because it just shows what happened to you guys when you get old. And so this is amazing that, you know, this was published in 1990, I would say 92, 93, when this book came out in 1980s. But the translation in Chinese and Russian and the Spanish and Iranian, it happened in that time period. So anyway, next. All right, at this time, it was, I was at Exxon, and the question was, you know, there's a lot of this Arun field that was significant amount of bugs. You could see the core on the right, and it is, all of those dark are the VUGs in this system. And normally our standard is to take a plug 1.5 inch diameter and do all the analysis. And I said, you know, we can't represent this rock with the small plugs. So of course the technology of the whole core analysis existed, but I tried to, nobody did it on this type of rocks. They all did it in midland formations, which is carbonates. And some of the Middle Eastern rocks from Qatar and other places were under my control. I was transferring to core lab in Midland. But this one, I said, well, I'm gonna have him clean and measure permeability. As you could see, the permeability of this rock was around 110 millidarcy with that black double edge arrows. Yeah, it's 110 millidarcy. Then I took 3 plugs from whatever the location, and the plugs are those 3 circles. And you could see had a one of them has a 80 millidarcy, the other one 40 millidarcy, and the third one on top is 20 millidarcy. So it's from 20 to 90 millidarcy variation in this rock. And then, you know, how do you average this to represent 110 millidarcy? There's no way. The whole core has a pore system that connects everything if properly connected during the testing. So I also had measurements by mini permeametry at a very small scale, like a few millimeters, and you could see that red line, it shows the variation, that some of the areas, it becomes higher than 110. And there's some areas that is much lower. You could see, again, we don't have a way to average this, to upscale a lot of measurement that we're doing to the scale of a reservoir simulation. So these are the challenging that it's facing. This scale up is really challenging. As you could see, I demonstrated that you really need to have the fine scale measurement. And a lot of people who are working for image analysis of micro CT or nano CT, I think with that type of information, they can do a better scale up. So this was something that really requires collaboration of engineers and scientists and geologists together to solve these problems. A lot of people, they think some of these micro CT, nano CTs are exactly the solution. No, it's another tool in the toolbox for characterization of reservoir. I was involved and project manager of reservoir characterization when I was at IIT Research Institute. And with Dr. Larry Lake, we organized 3 workshops or conferences in Tulsa and published 3-volume book about characterizing reservoirs, because there were a lot of funding from DOE that provided for improved recovery. But we demonstrated that just applying improved recovery without understanding, characterizing the reservoir, it's going to be all failure. So 3 volumes that we had from the industry, it helped a little bit to initiate this idea of characterization before application of improved recovery. All right, next. This is one of the things that I was saying, the gravity drainage process. It showed, the relative permeability that's associated with the gravity drainage and the instrumentation and the process that it happens. Here's initially that green saturation oil, and then after so many days, it's become like the one on the middle, and after a longer period, it becomes like a 5 or 6% over that. We had this posted as a poster when I joined ExxonMobil in Houston, and I had it on a wall, and our vice president of engineering came over. He says, "You put this in there?" I thought he wants to fire me. I said, "Yes, I did." He said, I said, "Do you see any value in this?" He says, "Let me tell you, I like it so much that I think we should fire the whole team of core analysts at ExxonMobil and have a couple of people that you work with." I said, "No, everybody has some expertise that needed in this process. And this is a gravity drainage that it showed that in some reservoir, it's an excellent process that should be implemented and captured." Anyway, this is that, and it was something that really had value and influenced my career. You could see it's highly risky, but I was good in innovating, and if there is problem, I always had a plan B to do something else that the money and effort is not wasted. So this is one of those things that the combination of the field test as well as laboratory test and modeling, it demonstrated that this is an excellent process that should be captured. All right, next. And this shows that what impact it had. With the process of gravity drainage, you need to have your wells closer to horizontal position. So the green is the performance of the reservoir before putting horizontal well. The horizontal well was very challenging because this was a very close to an unconsolidated reservoir, 1,000 millidarcy. So a gentleman named Jim Muttahed, as I mentioned, sometimes I write to him. He says, he was manager of drilling. He put this in the project that we drill and core the gravity drainage part of the reservoirs. And with that information, we modified relative permeabilities accordingly. And you could see how the production rate from 25,000 barrels a day, we went to as far as 100,000 barrels a day from the field, and influenced the plateau production and the rate and overall recovery. And you could see that, you know, you have to go from A to Z. You just can't be specialized in one thing and everything else is, that's not in my area. You really have to carry from A to Z. I mean, somebody was saying, you know, this is just not getting into the tank, but also to the destination. Sometimes as an engineer, this is your job. That's a reservoir management. And recently, I think Exxon reorganizing the whole company to see how they can respond to the needs of the market as fast as possible, rather than to say, we have this, well, you like it or not, that's the way it is. But now they're getting the chemical company, the downstream companies, and upstream companies all at one location, which is the Woodland and Spring. You know, they announced that they're going to do that, and 2023 completely be done. And so they say we save about 6 billion barrels by this reorganization. Now, true or not, but it shows people are coming to realization that the engineers should go from A to Z, the whole process. And you should, like, they hire you as not as a reservoir engineer, not as a production engineer, but as an engineer, because this whole world is developed based on engineers. Of course, other fields come to the picture, but there have to be a central role of the engineers in this process. So I think, you know, how is the price of oil up and down is going to change that? Not very much, because the history of mankind is this, that new ideas is implemented from the people that they never did college or educated. They came up with ideas that they implemented and still is helping our civilization. Go to the next. All right, this is something about, this is not that I have developed, but this is from a publication of fluid flow and sometimes wettability from a pore scale modeling. This way you take a part of the rock about a millimeter and then do analysis. You see how the fluids are moving from one direction to the other. It shows the variability of the permeability and porosity based on imaging. Again, this is another tool in understanding pore level activities. Could you check it? All right. So summarizing the learning and sharing with you, these are some of the ideas that I thought about, but I'm sure Reza and others have a lot more they can add to it, and I appreciate if they bring it up and to the people who are attending this. One of the things, you know, we always should expand knowledge and skills and be innovative and come up with new ideas. I mean, this is the only thing that reminds me is the verse that comes from Iranian culture. It says, and that's why I don't like this idea of retiring. It's really, you need to be creative, generating things. There's several of our Iranian friends that they skipped the retirement. I think classmate of Reza Golshan is one of them. There's several of them. Dr. At University of Southern Cal is another one. There is another one that at University of Southern Louisiana. There is another gentleman at the Golden, Colorado School of Mines. So there's several of us that, you know, skip the retirement and continue to work and coming up with something to generate something. Anyway, next thing is work on project that you can do, add value, and create new opportunities if it is not available. You remember that I said I didn't have any CT scanner, but managed to solicit one and start using it. Then network and teamwork, be visible and volunteer to work international. Again, you know, you have to be doing something that makes you visible. To tell you the truth, several people that I worked with during the time of valuing the engineers and keeping them for work or not, to lay them off, they said, well, this person may be very good, but is not visible. You know what I mean? This is very important to stay visible. And to tell you the truth, visibility from outside, from people that they know you outside of your company, it has much more effective than the people that within your company. This is the way it has worked. And so what does it mean? That you got to be active as professional societies and various things that makes you visible. Then collaborate with specialists in related fields and work closely with service companies. This is, working with service company, many a time, you don't have the same language that they have. So you have to work sometimes. I just introduced a few months ago or a year ago, a young engineer that wanted to get to college. I introduced him to Core Lab. And I said, this guy doesn't need any money, just want to work and learn. And companies are open to that. So, money is there, but we have to, a lot of times, the company that I was working was not interested to send me to various organizations, SPE and other things. I used my own money. I drove to that place in order to learn, expand my knowledge, and it really paid off. So I don't wait for somebody to dictate what is good for me and what is not good. I actually plan it myself and come up with tools to be able to do that. So then is be an active member of professional society, volunteer for communities, committees. SPE is open. Not too many people do that. I think young people, they can pick up the phone and says, I want to nominate myself, volunteer for this type of thing. So be professional in all aspects of your career and life. Unfortunately, many Iranians, they do things that, later on says, I don't know why I did that. Because it could not have a big black mark for entire career that you have. So these days, the wrongdoings, this does not disappear. In the internet, you do something that is not acceptable. All your life is going to be sticking with you. So this is very important to understand. And finally, write reports and publish technical articles. Because you know it or not, the Wealthy Pen Wealthy book that I published in 1980s, 40 years later, still people recognize me associated with that. So these are some of the things that I think it's important for you to remember. Anyway, if you have any questions, and I think, Hamid Reza, Dr. Hamid Reza could help to translate that. But the career is an individual metaphorical journey through learning, working, and other aspects of life, not necessarily a part of life that is concerned with employment and payment. So this is very important that you're putting your life in front of you, and then you want to say, who pay me more? Now, that's not the way it is. That's not the way you grow. Anyway, that's not the way that I see it. And that's the end of the 50 years career in a glimpse.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate you attending, and be happy to talk about other things that you are interested.
50 years and more to go.
I hope so.
Yes.
I think, Reza, you may put one together 20 years from now. You need that.
So, you see, the key to it is to find something that you like to do.
Exactly.
And all my career life, have been blessed and lucky that I did what I love to do in the oil industry, and in top of it, they even paid me for it.
Yes, exactly. I mean, this is the whole thing. Once you learn something, then you are highly in demand and you have developed passion for it. It's not something that one morning you wake up, he says, I have passion for this. It's just accepting a job. Sometimes you accept a job that is it's not on top. It's not something that everybody is proud of, but is a learning that got, the biggest learning that I had is when I worked for IIT Research Institute. It was a service and it was a research. And that opened up my whole career to learning more in that area. So you have to become expert in one area, but you have to be a generalist, learning about the whole spectrum of things.
Exactly.
So this is the advice for that.
That's right.
I think Dr. Fassi wants to ask a question or comment. Dr. Fassi, you are here.
No, I just want to first mention that Dr. Honarpour has many stories, and this 1 hour is not going to do justice. I think you need to put a session, 12-hour long session for him to tell you everything. I mean, it's all the stuff. But I also saw that Mr. Reza Golshan, I mean, has he talked about his career? I mean, he is another phenomenon that he needs to talk about his own experience.
Exactly. Reza, don't excuse yourself.
I'm just a baby, gentleman.
I think, we really need to hear from you.
Yes,
I'm sure that, it was, for me, I really postponed it a few times, and finally,
right.
Hamid said, Matt, it's your time.
Right.
And I said, okay.
I
Under pressure.
to learn more from you all, and then hopefully have a 10 minutes of talks.
Oh God. You have more than that to contribute.
Thank you. But by the way, one other comment about the old days of working in Iran. There were some fields in Ahwaz, near Ahwaz, you remember that, Dr. Honarpour, Maroon field, they had some wells that they were producing 90,000 barrels a day.
You're exactly right. I was going to quote that, and I said, it can't be true. Perhaps I'm adding a zero in front by mistake, but actually there is 100,000 barrels a day for several years without additional pressure drop.
Exactly.
Because the well just hit the fracture that kept producing. You're right. You're right. Now, of course, there was a lot of better management that they could have done that.
Exactly.
But I think, that is that they were lucky. If Iran didn't have the industry, oil industry, and those fields, I would say it was very difficult to distinguish it between Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Iran. Iranian, with all their talents, they grew up in that atmosphere. So that is the learning, the oil industry really helped our country and us, all of us. And I am very appreciative to that. Of course, Reza and some of his friends, they went to Reza Fasihi and some of his friends went to Abadan Institute of Technology. That was ranked by Western standard, one of the top schools that these guys had attended. They had program about accounting and all the way to production engineer, reservoir engineer. And I think, they were institutions that they were that in Iran. I did not go to universities in Iran. 1 year I went to schools and I decided that I need to get to West and start working and convince my parents that I need to do, and I'm going to do it myself. So my parents were very happy. They said, thank you very much, but don't call back. And so that's what happened. I worked really hard, pay off my schools, and then put a life together. And I appreciate the oil industry who provided me with this opportunity.
You're right, Matt. I think thanks to NIOC and also the oil service companies, we had two major centers. One was in Ahvaz, the OSCO Center, oil service companies. They were really doing top research there. And also AIT, which was really the top-notch school. So those are the two centers that really were actually developed and created because of the oil industry. You're right.
Yeah. Reza, are you going to Iran once in a while lecturing at Abadan Institute of Technology?
Not anymore. It has been a while, and unfortunately, that has stopped.
That's bad. That is sad.
Okay, we have a question from the Mr. Hari. Maybe you can ask, please, Fuad.
Hello, this is Fuad. Actually, that was my question, Dr. Honarpour, because I was blessed to be Dr. Fasihi's student about 22 years ago in Ahwaz. So I was just going to ask you if you ever thought about like teaching or going back to Iran for short, courses and stuff like that.
That's a loaded question. I really appreciate your question, and being associated with Dr. Fasihi, it's an honor. He is particularly has a talent of lecturing. Several times he talked, and some of my colleagues at BHP, they said, Matt, this is really very talented individual. I don't let him know that, but he was extremely good in lecturing. So he is really made for university, that practical, challenging issues that he can explain. I was teaching, and I was nominated as for teacher award for SPE. I didn't get it, but I really liked working with the students. But I think my concern is, I don't want to get involved in the politics. And going to Iran is sometimes it is that politics, and there's a lot of sometimes not very professionals that some people take the bath. So that is what I avoided. I
think you're being generous. It's always politics. It's not sometimes.
Yes, yes. I mean, an example, in 1985, I had an offer from Libya to work as a reservoir engineer. And I went to Canada to interview with them. And so they were saying, okay, how much did it cost you to come? And then gave $100 bill. It says, this is it. You don't need to fill out anything. And we offer you $100,000 salary, 95% of it, put in any bank you want to. And I talked with my wife. She said, I never want to go work there. I said, why? He says, well, just personal reason, I don't want to work there. And then a year later, at the time of Reagan, it was bombarded. And then later on, Gaddafi was removed from power. So there is this type of thing, the uncertainty that is associated with some of these countries. I'm not saying that Iran is in that category, but these are the risks that you should consider, uncertainties, taking your kids and all of that. When you are single, you can do that. I was ready to do that. But when you have a family, you put a life together, every year that passes, it becomes harder to do that. But I think I like the way that Reza did it. He was going and lecturing once in a while, and he was good at it. Anyway, thanks for you mentioning that.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. As we are in that run of the time, I would love to once again thank Dr. Honarpour for his very interesting talk and great advice, and thank all of the participants for this event. Thank you so much, and I try to close this session. Have a great
Thank you.
evening.
Thank you so much. I
Thank you.
appreciate for arranging that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.